Buddy's Big Race by Mariette F. Edmondson, illustrated by Christopher R. Edmondson. In the little town of Lake Aline, where Tim and his old dog Buddy lived, the snow had fallen deep, deeper than a thick white blanket of clouds, deeper than anyone could remember. That day, Tim hitched Buddy up to his family's wooden dog sled, scratched Buddy's ears, and said, "Let's go to town, boy." Buddy licked Tim's mittens. Tim climbed aboard the sled, and they set off together down the hill. In town, the sidewalks shone in the cold, and icicles crusted the rooftops. Tim watched the sleepy town go by as Buddy pulled the sled along, shop after shop dressed all in white. Then the sled turned the corner, and a golden glow fell across Tim's boots. He caught his breath. "Easy, Buddy. Whoa," he said, and they slid to a stop in the golden light. It was coming from the big glass window. Tim stepped off the sled and pressed his nose to the icy glass. There in the shop, a trophy gleamed like the sun, warm and beautiful. Tim's eyes grew wide. "It's perfect," he whispered. Beside the trophy, a sign read, "Dog sled race, first prize, this trophy. Ice carnival today." Tim looked again at the trophy and then at Buddy. The old dog looked back at him with bright, wise eyes. Tim grinned and hopped back on the sled. "Come on, Buddy," he said. "Let's go win this trophy." On Main Street, the smell of popcorn and hot sugar filled the cold, crisp air. Tim and Buddy picked their way through the crowds, the snowmen and ice carvings, the pie stands and people, until they heard loud voices and dogs barking close by. On Main Street, the smell of popcorn and hot sugar filled the cold, crisp air. Tim and Buddy picked their way through the crowds, the snowmen and the ice carvings, the pie stands and people, until they heard loud voices and barking close by. "I'm hungry. When is this race gonna start? Woof, woof. Your dog is stepping on me. Mom!" "That sounds like it," Tim told Buddy. And they headed for the noise. A minute later, a sign appeared. "Dog sled race, starting line." Tim and Buddy pulled up to the starting line, next to Tim's neighbor, Bernie. Tim's hands sweated in his mittens and butterflies danced in his stomach. "This whole thing is pointless, Tim," Bernie grumbled. "I'd rather be writing stories for my newspaper." He glared at his parents in the crowd, and then he kicked the snow. "Rats!" "Hey, Tim!" The air froze in Tim's lungs. He looked sideways and saw Hank, the meanest, most spoiled kid in Lake Aline, standing at the starting line with his strong young husky dog. Hank sneered. "What are you going to do with that old dog?" he shouted. The noise stopped. Every last eye in the crowd turned and stared at Tim. Then everyone laughed. "Old dog?" Tim looked down at Buddy. For the first time he saw the sagging belly, the wrinkles under his best pal's chin. Maybe Hank was right, he thought. Maybe Buddy is too old to race. What was I thinking? Tears stung Tim's ice-cold cheeks. He wished he could sprout wings and fly away. Then he felt a lick on his glove, and Buddy was looking up at him. As Tim gazed into the old dog's face, his heart leapt with hope. Is that the spark of a young dog in Buddy's eyes? He wondered. At that moment, a golden glow passed over the snow. Tim looked up, and there was the trophy going by in the hands of the mayor, shining like the sun, perfect. Tim swallowed the lump of fear in his throat. Around him, the laughter faded away. He checked Buddy's harness and hopped on the sled. Then he fixed his eyes on the trophy at the finish line, gripped the sled, and held his breath. Bang! The crack of the starting gun rang across the snow. Tim's sled shot forward like a rocket. He leaned in, and Buddy ran with all he had, head down, flying as if angels moved under his paws. White snow and cheering crowds rushed by in a blur. Only a few more feet. Tim leaned as far as he could lean, and Buddy stretched as far as he could stretch. The finish line disappeared under the sled as they soared over it. The roar of the crowd rang in Tim's ears as the sled skidded to a stop. He stared at Buddy, his heart pounding. Buddy, panting and smiling, stared back. Tim blinked and looked over his shoulder. Far behind him, the starting line was a blurry pile of kids and dogs. When did the gun go off? Get out of my way. They're stepping on me. Woof, growl. Mom! They never started the race, Tim thought. And that was when it hit him. We won! Tim breathed, his eyes wide. And then he grinned and shouted, We won! He leapt off the sled and threw his arms around Buddy's neck, buried his face in the old dog's fur. Buddy, you are the best dog a kid could ever have, he laughed. Thank you. What? That old dog won? Tim lifted his face from Buddy's neck. One by one, the other kids and dogs were crossing the finish line now, all except Hank. Hank just stood in the snow, Tim lifted his face from Buddy's neck. One by one, other kids and dogs were crossing the finish line now, all except Hank. Hank just stood in the snow, drop-jawed, staring at Tim and Buddy. Not possible, he wailed. I demand a do-over. Someone touched Buddy's shoulder. He turned and found himself face to face with Bernie's crooked tooth grin. Tim, that was the most fun I have ever had, Bernie chuckled. I'm going to write a great story about this crazy day. Before he knew it, Tim heard the mayor calling him over to receive his prize. Son, this is for you, the mayor announced in a big voice, placing the golden trophy in Tim's hands as the whole town watched and clapped. Good work winning the dog sled race. Thank you, sir, Tim beamed, his face alight in the golden glow. But, sir? Yes, Tim, the mayor asked. Tim smiled. I didn't win the race. We won the race. My old dog Buddy and I.